Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
Kerry Clark, columnist, editorial writer.
Metro editor Greg Jefferson.
Nancy Pryor-Johnson, deputy editorial board editor.
And we're going to talk today about the momentum that I think we all can see building on the gun reform issue, both in Texas and other parts of the country, certainly in Tennessee. But before we do that, I want to talk about Proposition A, which I think is really the issue that's driving the most interest in the San Antonio municipal election, which is happening on May 6th. Early voting starts April 24th. And Proposition A is a proposed charter amendment which would expand the city's cite and release program. It would decriminalize abortion and marijuana. And we've seen on this podcast, we've had representatives of both sides. We've had representatives from the police union and also the Prop A side. But we've seen the business community come out strongly against it. Local radio host Trey Ware, who we know is a staunch conservative, has described Prop A as the most stupid thing he's seen proposed in San Antonio in all his years. Mayor Ron Nirenberg, to my surprise, came out last week against it. He did not. He's kind of stayed out of the fray a couple of years ago when we had some of the same activists had a proposition that would have taken away collective bargaining from the police union. But in this case, he did. I think I was going to ask you about this, Greg. I mean, get your thoughts on this. My sense is that there are people in the business community who wanted him to.
I think they exerted a lot of pressure on Mayor Nirenberg to get him to speak out against this. It's just my impression. We're in this interesting place. I mean, think back, going on 10 years ago, there was a real rift between the business community and the police union over Cheryl Scully. So basically, Cheryl Scully and the union had gone to war over the upcoming contract at the time, the upcoming contract. And the business community sided with Scully in that. I mean, took out ads and, it looked like a campaign. And now with this issue, with Prop A, they're back in alignment. Business community is on the same page as the police union. And I think that's creating a tremendous amount of pressure on Nirenberg.
Yeah, I think the probably the most competitive city council race, District 1. Mm-hmm. In that one, we've seen Mario Bravo, the incumbent. He kind of refused to take a side of that.
Exactly, which is that's not going to fly in this election. I think Prop A is such a powerful issue. It's gonna shape, or in some cases warp, every probably council race.
Yeah.
And so, Mario Bravo is not wanting to take a stand on the most important issue on the ballot, honestly. I just don't see that being a really great campaign strategy.
It's interesting, too, that 2 years ago with the Fix SAPD proposition, he also stayed out of that one. Yeah. And I think my memory is that he had worked with that group early on, kind of helping them, kind of shape their messaging, or when they were trying to get the petition drive together. And then he said, I think he was pretty openly said, for political reasons, I'm staying out of this. Right. So, Kerry, what do you make of it just seems like this has become such a lightning rod issue and we can talk a little bit about what the practical effects will be if this passes. But beyond that, it just seems like this is dividing people. When people are talking about being tough on crime, we're talking about the protecting businesses, and then versus police reform. All these issues are kind of playing out here.
I think the problem for the supporters and architects of Proposition A is that it's not dividing it enough. Mathematically, Proposition 3, we would have meetings with candidates, and it would be pretty much 50-50. We're doing we've had so far 7 city council candidate endorsement meetings, and with all the candidates, and so far there's 17 against and 3 for. And Mario was the same way in our meeting, but I put him in the against category because everything he said was pretty much against.
Interesting.
This would be one of the great political upsets if it should pass. But it just seems to be this momentum that's rolling against it.
And I guess the question is like, why? Because you're right. I mean, that our candidates are very. I mean, Sutkor, I think, is in District 1 came out for it, and I was
only because of the abortion
issue.
Yeah.
But I'm betting that she's getting some serious pushback in District 1. Jeremy Roberts, who is the other big challenger, is against it.
Right.
Really interesting to see how that's going to play.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the problem is that they put them all in one and didn't divide them up. But I think that was how they felt they had the best chance, just throw it all against the wall and see what sticks kind of thing. Hopefully you'll, have somebody like Sutkor. That one really surprised me. And, I am all for the rights, right? Abortion rights, women's rights to choose, all of that. A woman should be able to choose. We all know what happened to that. But to be able to put that up there and just say that is the only reason I support this, that makes it problematic, And when we are interviewing these candidates, I'm surprised sometimes at everybody against it. But that's the reason why. It's just because it's just way too much in one proposition there.
It is a lot, yeah. And it's coming along in a period of increased rates of crime. So there's, San Antonians are more concerned about crime now than they would be in, a period with less criminal activity. And on top of that, you've got the police union with their messaging is very simple. This will, approving Prop A will result in more crime, and it's a very complicated argument that they're making. That basically permissiveness, the writing of citations rather than the making of arrests, will lead to and encourage more crime. That's arguable, but that's not really their argument. It's like this. It's gonna mean more crime. Yeah. And so far, the supporters of Prop A, their response has been, I mean, they're kind of thrown back on their heels, and they kind of get into the weeds. They they try to sort out, fact from fiction, and in doing that, you just lose people. It's a very complex thing they're trying to do, and they kind of get lost in the details.
Yeah, and if you think about Proposition B, which was about collective bargaining, it was, I think, harder for the police union to. People aren't. It's much easier, I think, to make the argument or to get people concerned about the possibility of property theft. When it's down to like protecting collective bargaining for police union, it's people don't necessarily care that much, and that was also before the union had negotiated a new contract, and people probably remembered that it had been a struggle coming to an agreement the previous time. So that was a really close election, and I don't know how it's going to play out. The thing that for me, when you've got a couple of things going on. I think the fact that the city is not going to implement this. I mean, aside from the creation of the justice director, Andy Segovia, the city attorney, said we're not going to implement this because it violates state law. So you've got that factor. You're going to have a lawsuit over the abortion issue if it passes. So I think even people who support police reform have to be a little frustrated at the thought that most of what they want to see happen here will not be implemented, most likely. And I don't. We may see a legal challenge if that happens. But that's I think a problematic situation. The other thing is that I think when you really look at the effects of this, I don't think that they're as major. If this was implemented, I don't think the effects would be as major as maybe people on either side think, because we well know we've had a cite and release program in the city since 2019. If you look at cases, looking at city data, cases since this has been in effect, or at least over the first 39 months from going up to October of 2022, if in cases in which they had the option, the officers had the option to cite people, because there's some cases where it might be it might qualify for cite and release, but then there's an outstanding arrest warrant or there's some other offense involved. But in cases where they really had the option to cite people, in 80% of those cases, they did cite people. And I think there are about 1,800 cases of property theft where they just gave people a ticket. And there's also the fact that they make sure they have to get their proper ID to make sure that they're not somebody's just not making up a name and that person has to show up, for a meeting later. If they don't, there could be an arrest warrant out for them. So they're not getting off scot-free, and the police department is already citing people in most of these cases. I mean, if people think, people are not going to fear committing these crimes because they're going to get cited. They are getting cited.
That's one of the biggest criticisms we've heard on DA Joe Gonzalez and the police department, and everybody is like, they're not rough on, they're not hard on crime because they're doing this. So it's already
happening to a great degree. But of course, the big issue is really the fact that the officers at least have the discretion. They can make the call. And this would take this away from them. And I think in most cases, they're choosing to cite people anyway, but they want the power. And I think the public is looking at this and probably thinking, if I want the officer, or at least I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think there are a lot of voters probably thinking, I want the officer to at least have if there are extenuating circumstances to be able to make the arrest.
Yeah, I mean, if making an arrest will kind of de-escalate the situation, say there's the threat of violence, there's not actual violence when the police officer shows up, but if just cited, I think there's concern that it could become explosive after that.
Separate somebody from a dangerous situation.
If you can't detain the person to take them in, it's just going to get worse. I think that's part of the fear.
Yeah. So, Carrie, is based on you talking to other candidates and just your sense of what's going on in the community, is it your sense that this is probably going to go down?
It does. When we met with the organizers, though, Ananda Thomas did say something that was interesting when talking about the polling that they've done, and that the section that does the strongest is abortion, which is such a wild card, but and it would be amazing if that's what would somehow pull it through.
But that's one that the city can't even act on, right? So that's I mean, it's not even like it would make a difference.
It would be. I mean, just going back in time, but if somehow it had flopped, like if Proposition A was up in 2021. First of all, you wouldn't have the abortion issue because we wouldn't have had, it wouldn't have been rolled back yet, and you would still have some of the emotion of George Floyd. And if Proposition B in 2023, you'd still have an interesting debate about collective bargaining rights for police, and you could get both passed, but it's just the timing is just off. And again, it would be an amazing upset if it should win.
Yeah, I just don't see that.
Even the justice director point of it is interesting because I would think that would be one of the easier ones. So or not say that's one of the controversial ones. But I believe it was last week. Terry. I was surprised when she said that, but it made so much sense. And I would think Terry would have been for it actually, and just kind of knowing her background, but she was not for it.
She's for A, but but she has problems with the justice director.
Yes, and the justice director part, and she just made a point, and not to quote her directly, but basically, to paraphrase her, saying that each council member should be doing that. That is their role, is to decide policy, and why do they need a justice director to do that? Because each one was elected, by their constituents to do that, and that they are shaping policy the way they deem necessary.
Right. She may also be concerned about the makeup of the council that would be appointing this justice director. It's probably a little more conservative than she would care for.
Good point.
Good point.
I'm going to start talking about the gun issue. Before I do, last week the state legislature began its budget debate, and one of the issues we've been talking about and monitoring is the issue of school vouchers, which is really divisive and something that at least a faction of Republicans in the legislature have tried to put forward in recent years and have always failed. And the House had a vote. It's largely symbolic vote because the budget will change, but they in a budget amendment, they voted to ban funding for school vouchers. It was an 86 to 52 vote. And the part that I wanted to focus on, and like I said, we still have to see how this plays out, but it is a sign that it seems to be a pretty solid majority in the Texas House against school vouchers. But on the San Antonio front, the Democrats in the House all voted for this amendment to ban funding for school vouchers. On the Republican side, we had Steve Allison also vote for it. John Lujan voted present, and in my experience with Representative Lujan, he's talked about being supportive of conceptually supportive of public education, but on a lot of issues, it's sometimes hard to kind of figure out exactly where he lands. And I think this is kind of an example. I know that he sees himself as a supporter of public education, but this was a chance, I think, to kind of take to make a stand with a vote, and he
put it on the record.
Put it on the record. Yeah, that's right. Did not do that. So I thought that there's a lot to come on this issue, but I wanted to make that point. On the gun issue, just in the past couple of weeks, we've seen last Wednesday we saw a national school walkout over the issue of gun violence, including we saw it in Uvalde, which of course is still reeling from last May's school shooting at Robb Elementary. The state senator who represents Uvalde, Roland Gutierrez, has had two heated exchanges with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. A couple of weeks ago, Gutierrez took the rare step of challenging a ruling from the Lieutenant Governor. Almost never happens. He was trying to get an amendment in a bill which would have restricted online assault weapon sales. And Dan Patrick said it was not germane to the bill and threw it out, and you had a really heated exchange there. Last week there was a debate on the bill that would restrict drag shows in Texas, prevent drag performances in front of kids. Roland Gutierrez made the point on the floor in questioning Brian Hughes, the author of the bill, made the point, well, we're not, when it comes to taking care of kids, we're not doing a whole lot to protect kids from gun violence. And Dan Patrick shut him down and said if he continued bringing up a subject that Dan Patrick considered not relevant to the bill, that he wasn't going to allow him to speak from the floor again. So we've had that happening. We had, along the same lines in Tennessee, we saw the Tennessee three Democrats who had participated, I guess in conjunction with a protest at the state capitol. They had a protest in favor of gun reform on the House floor. Two of them, both of whom happened to be African American men, were expelled from the legislature by Tennessee Republicans. Just Sunday, we saw in his final press conference, a pregame press conference of the basketball season, Greg Popovich went on about a 10-minute, screed about the issue of gun reform, and I mean it was some of the most blunt language I've heard from anybody on this. I mean, this is an issue we've all been talking about for a long time. It seems like something is happening right now. Carrie, I mean, I don't know if you have a sense of, like, obviously we saw the shooting in Nashville recently, and that was big. But.
Yeah, just a little pop. And as we speak, there was a shooting in Louisville today, which we find some of the details. I think everyone had the experience of December 2012 with Sandy Hook saying, "This is it. This is where we get to," and then it wasn't it. And then I think some of us had that feeling last year with Uvalde, and it wasn't it. And it's easy to get, understandable to get frustrated and give up hope. But sometimes it's the accumulation of things. And I think things are sadly, as things slowly accumulate, that includes the bodies of people and then the bodies of children. But I think what happened in Tennessee last week is something that, I mean, we kind of feel like it's kind of big right now, but historically, I think folks are going to look back at that moment where the tectonic plates just kind of shifted. Because I think the Tennessee legislature unleashed something, a movement, or reinforced a movement of young people that, again, not knowing when it's going to actually change what we think should be changed and what that change is going to look like. We don't know what that change is going to look like. But I think something has been set in motion. And you've got all these kids. And that's every major movement throughout world history has been led by young folks.
Yep.
Yeah.
And now you got high school students in the lead. So I think something's going to happen. I just don't know.
You
when
did a
or
great
when.
column on the school walkout last
you.
week. So what did you? So we had a national protest last week. Kids walking out of schools across the country, including Uvalde.
Yeah.
Like, what was the significance of that for you?
I think it's it's cliche that we're just tired. We're not going to take it anymore. And yeah, those walkouts were organized, but I think you can have tighter organization. There's so many ways that you can use civil disobedience and nonviolent protest beyond marching and walking out of schools. And I think a lot of these young folks, I think some of them already are studying those methods. I think we're going to see better organization. And I think it's going to be a mass movement, and that you just can't tell folks that we're not going to do nothing about protecting your lives. We're going to go after drag shows, and we're going to have a governor of Texas who's more interested in pardoning a man just convicted of murder than doing anything about children and teachers killed under his watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was in Uvalde when I was there a couple of weeks ago, and we're going from one interview to the next, and pass by, and we see this elementary kids in their playground. And this is Flores Elementary, where a lot of the kids who were survivors, they're in Uvalde, of the school shooting, go to school. And so one of the survivors, Caitlin Gonzalez, she led her little group, and it's only about 7 or 8 little girls. And they're in the playground, and we, got out of the car and watched them, and I put it on, got some video and photo and put it on Twitter and stuff. But it was just, these little girls, they were just, it was impromptu that one of them, Caitlin, called her mom that day and said, "Mom, we're not going to lunch. We're just going to, protest." And her mom's like, "What?" But kind of used to it from Caitlin, and Caitlin's a little girl that was profiled in the Washington Post, that she was in the school when the shooting was happening and hiding in her classroom. She did not get injured, but obviously she has PTSD. Some of her best friends were killed, and she was in the school when it happened. So she's there, and you could just watch these little girls, and then they would go in the back, and not go in the back because everybody is watching them, right? There's just a small group of media there on the outside, and then their principal watching and telling us to stay away. But it's a public street corner that we're watching it from, and so then they go and then they huddle, and then she's like, "Okay, what chant are we going to do next?" And they're coming up with their little plan. And she said, "No, let's not say it like that. Let's say no more school shootings, okay?" And doing it, and they were just these budding organizers, and it was just beautiful to watch this. And then you have Lalo. Lalo was standing on the outside, and he made it very clear to me. He said, "I didn't call them. I didn't create this. I did not. Nobody's organizing this." And Caitlin's mom told me the same thing. She said, "It wasn't me. I didn't. This was her idea. In fact, they haven't eaten, and it's hot, right? It's hot out there, and they haven't eaten." And but that's exactly what you're talking about, these young people who are rising up. Now, these little girls, 10 years old, doing this. And then the same thing with the Uvalde, the march that happened on that Wednesday last week. I believe it was Wednesday and the National Walkout Day. And when they had that, a lot of the parents who lost children in the Uvalde school shooting at Robb Elementary, they were there and they watched over the kids. But there were several times when they said, "We are not in charge. We're not leading this. The kids are leading it. The students are leading it," and saying, "This is yours. We're not doing it." And saying, "We're just making sure you're okay, we're making sure that you're crossing the street safely and that everybody is okay, but this is not on us. This is yours. And there's so much power in that. In Tennessee, the loudest, you could hear them in the gallery when all this is happening. And I was watching and listening to in the background as I worked all day listening to it. But these are young voices.
Very young voices. Yeah.
And that is, Carrie, you're absolutely right. That's what's going to take is these young voices.
And Nashville
to
was
rise up.
was the site of the 1960 Nashville student movement.
Yeah.
John Lewis and Diane Nash. That's
That's what it's going to take.
And I think that the part of the passion is just it comes out of the frustration that any debate on this issue is being shut down. And what happened in the Tennessee legislature is
They
prime
cut
example
their
of
mics
that.
off.
Yeah,
Completely, cut their
and they
mics
can say,
off.
well, they were not following the decorum of the legislature. But this is an issue that people feel passionately about, and this should be a debate. And one of the things that we hear on this issue is people who are resistant to gun reform is that it's all about mental health. And I don't think that it's an either or proposition. Certainly,
Right.
we need to fund and provide better services for mental health, and that's certainly an issue. But if you think about foreign policy, it's always been very easy for people to understand that if you have a foreign leader who's unhinged or irrational, that's a concern. But if that same leader who's unhinged and irrational has access to nuclear weapons, that's an existential threat.
Very good point.
And so someone who has mental – and by the way, I don't want to paint people with mental health challenges with a broad brush because they take all kinds of forms. But I'm saying people who have severe mental health problems and could be a danger to themselves or others, you give those people an AR-15 and then that changes everything. And I don't think it's that hard to understand, and I don't think it's given all that that parents and children and families have had to endure in this country. I don't think it's too much to ask that we can have a serious debate, and people can hash out what that results in. But to have at least a debate to show respect, I don't think that's too much to ask, and I don't even think that's a partisan stand. I think that should just be
absolutely
common sense.
It's about. I know someone who's a teacher who's afraid of going to school, of going to class because she thinks there's going to be a school shooting, and but she has babies who will one day be in those schools, and she has students in her classroom who she has to keep safe, right? But teachers, and I'm a former teacher, but teachers shouldn't have to think every day their lives are on the line,
right.
and they have to protect their kids and throw their body in front of the kids, in case their students are getting shot up. This is something very serious. And, I told her, I said, but your babies will be in school soon too. And she said, I know. And this is just, is this the kind of school system America wants? Like, we're okay with this? It shouldn't be okay. And it absolutely shouldn't be a partisan issue, but obviously it is.
Yeah, we deserve debate on this. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap things up. Hope everyone out there is doing well. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back next week. Take care.